Good evening and welcome to episode 39 of the Political Mind podcast. It's a privilege and honor to have author Tim Alston back on the show tonight. For 44 years, Mr. Alston received industry awards for marketing and public relations, higher education, administration, and customer service retention expertise with private universities, multinational PR agencies, and a broadcast satellite service company. Then, more importantly, God revealed to him his special calling or ministry for servant leadership, recovering from his own addiction to self-egoholism, as he calls it, as well as embracing his lifelong personal and professional leadership from the middle. Now, most importantly, Mr. Alston has dedicated his life to creating services and products addressing both egoholism, recovering, and silver medal leadership, achieving your number oneness by embracing your number two-ness. As a result, he's written and published in 2017, 7 Steps to Manage Ego Problems, the how-to guide for somebody else, a free downloadable ebook on his website, www.timalston.com. In 2020, Mr. Alston published the U.S. coronavirus crisis and the rise of the silver metal leaders. And this past March of 2021, Tim Alston has published his third book entitled U.S. Politics, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders, which recaps the 2020 presidential election in light of Bible best practices and the servant leadership style of Jesus Christ. Mr. Tim Alston, it's a privilege to have you back, sir. I'm excited to, just dive into your newest work. But I want to ask you first, what inspired you, sir, to write such a book? As the U.S. Politics, the Rise of the Silver Medal Leaders, because I read where you credit Oprah Winfrey with this book structure. Can you explain to the audience, please, sir?
Certainly can. But first of all, Michael, a hearty congratulations to you, Mr. Graduate. We are so proud of you here for recently graduating from Howard University School of Law. And I had the privilege of actually meeting you last Saturday night when you chose to come back to your original undergraduate HBCU alma mater and march and receive your degree. So congratulations to you. We're very, very proud of you, and keep it up. You're right. Back in 1989, I read an article in Esquire magazine. At the end of that year, the end of that decade, they had a roundtable, much like you do now, a roundtable of celebrities, and we're asking them what was some of their forecasts for the new decade, the 1990s. And one of the questions they asked was, what is the book that everybody should read? Oprah Winfrey, who was a rising star at the time, said, everybody should read the Bible. And her quote was, every answer to every question that man could ever pose has already been given. And that caught me off guard. I said, wow. And as I started writing this book some 32 years later, I began to think of what I call the Oprah Winfrey Challenge, and that every answer is in the Bible. So I said, okay, I've got a number of political questions that will serve as the title for my different chapters. And let me try to prove or disprove Oprah Winfrey to see if the Bible had actual answers to those questions. So yes, in many ways, I credit and thank Oprah Winfrey for throwing out what I call the Oprah Winfrey Challenge back in 1989 in Esquire magazine.
So, Mr. Alston, this past February on the 25th, during that podcast, when I interviewed you about your earlier work, which was entitled The U.S. Coronavirus Crisis and the Rise of Silver Medal Leaders, and now this book, too, is entitled U.S. Politics, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders. Can you refresh our memories as to what is a silver medal leader for those who are unfamiliar with that terminology?
Surely. Silver medal leader is a person who achieves their number oneness by embracing their number two-ness. The characteristics of a silver medal leader, these are leaders from the middle. The characteristics are basically threefold that are embodied within its name. Number one, you're a silver medal leader if you report to someone in your organization. That organization could be your family. That organization could be your social buddies. It could be your workplace or your place of worship. That makes you silver because you report to someone. Secondly, you when you do your task, with character, with fortitude, and with courage, then you have mettle, mettle. And finally, when you do your job, when you succeed, not because of your title, not because of your position, but because you have influence and relationships, which are the key characteristics integral to being a leader. So a silver medal leader is one who reports to someone, is someone who does their job with fortitude, character, and courage, and they also succeed because of their influence and relationships. That makes you a silver medal leader. And the prime example, the role model for that is Jesus Christ. And so when I wrote this book, U.S. Politics, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders, I began to see that the race to the White House and the victory for the White House was achieved by people who were silver medal leaders.
So I have to ask, sir, can you dive in and get specific? Who in this past election cycle, and even now, politics has changed, dramatically since January the 6th.
Yes.
Maybe not dramatically, but has taken it. New norms have been broken.
Yes.
And so I want to ask you, sir, if you can dive into who, in your view, since you're the author, would be considered or would qualify as a silver medal leader right now.
Certainly. Well, we can go right from the top. And what I do in the book, Michael, is my chapter titles Ask Political Questions, but they are answered by biblical best practices. For example, chapter number 1 raises the question, why did American voters elect Biden and Harris? The answer to that question I found in the Bible, in the story of the woman who had the issue of blood. And if you know, the story says basically this woman who had an issue of blood, she'd been struggling for 12 years with this issue, heard that Jesus was coming to town, and she said, if I could just touch the hem of his garment. And she did, and Jesus said, who touched me? The disciples said, well, there are a bunch of people around you, Jesus. In so many words, all these people, these groupies around you are trying to get a selfie with you. And why do you mean somebody touched you? And so he said, no, somebody touched me in a real way. They had a real need. Well, Biden and Harris touched the American electorate because they felt what they felt. Now, what do I mean? Biden and Harris were the American people themselves. For example, Biden and Harris each had lost efforts to win job promotions. Biden, for example, had lost relatives. He lost his first wife to death. He lost his first daughter. And then he lost his first son, Beau Biden, later on. 57% of Americans have had a close loss in their family, so they can relate to them. Also, roughly 52% of children in this country have witnessed a parental divorce. Kamala Harris and her sister had witnessed their parents' divorce. And so there was that level of feeling there. Also, and many of us, if we watch Joe Biden speak carefully, we'll notice the fact that he is a part of the 1% of the population, or 3 million people, that have a stutter. He has a stutter. And when it comes to Kamala Harris, she certainly represents those who have experienced racial and gender discrimination. They feel and they felt, and Americans felt, that they could relate to them. On the other hand, the opponent to Joe Biden, the incumbent President Trump, always sought to present the image of invincibility. Nothing was ever wrong. And the American people said, once we got to know this guy, he does not feel what we feel. And we certainly saw it when it came to, and I say, it's his alleged COVID-19 positive test. I sincerely believe, and many believe, he never really had it. It was a campaign prop that failed. And so that was chapter 1. Chapter 2 raises the question, why did Biden pick Harris? And as I was reading my Bible, I read the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well in John chapter 4. And when I read that story, I saw so many parallels, Mike, to Biden. I entitle it basically, Jesus and the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well meet Joe Biden and the Senate woman at the first debate. And when you read that story in the Bible, you recognize the fact that Both Jesus and that woman came to that well with unmet needs. Biden came to the first debate with an unmet need, and Kamala Harris came, and they were able to fuse themselves together. And what happened, interestingly, in that Bible story is Jesus used that Samaritan woman to be the first evangelist to the non-Jewish, non-traditional world. And obviously, Kamala Harris spoke to a non-traditional world by her own being. Number one, she didn't go to Ivy League school. She went to an HBCU. She pledged a black sorority. And she married a Jew who was a part of another despised group. So she was a person very much like the Samaritan woman. She was out of her league. In chapter 3, I raised the question, who really brought the victory to Joe Biden? And I compare Joe Biden to Naaman the leper in the Bible, because Biden and Naaman both had incurable diseases. Naaman had the incurable disease of leprosy. Joe Biden had the incurable disease of never, ever being able to win a primary or caucus election since 1988. And it just goes on and on and on from there.
This is very interesting. And so, Mr. Alston, you make the claim that this new book of yours, U.S. Politics, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders, is probably the first and only post-2020 presidential election book written from a biblical perspective. How can you make that claim, and why do you think that is the case? Why aren't there other works similar to yours?
It's a very good question. When I began to write the book, because it was coming from my experience, my Bible experience, and reading the newspapers, combining the two, when I began to read, I began to do the research on whom else was doing a book of this sort. All of the books that I saw written from a Christian perspective were written by Christian evangelicals pre-election, as they were predicting a Trump victory based upon their interpretation of the Bible. What I began to notice is that after the election, when Donald Trump lost, and for the record, Donald Trump did lose the election, when I began to notice the fact that there was an absolute silence from that community out the race, because apparently they had lost. And so what I did was simply begin to put my book together and begin to show how there was a marriage of politics or news and also Bible best practices throughout the election. And so I was pleased to be able to do that, because the majority, 80% of Americans, claim to be followers of Christ. And so the book is political in nature. The election will backdrop, but the true message was how people in number two positions, like Jesus Christ, were the real heroes of our lives, the heroes of the Bible, and the heroes of the 2020 presidential election. In chapter 3, I talk about Jim Clyburn, who was in a number two position in a Congress behind Nancy Pelosi. And he delivered the speech on February 26th that propelled Joe Biden into winning South Carolina and on to the Democratic nomination and the White House. What was so phenomenal about that speech, as good as it was, as I listened to it, Michael, I said, what does the speech remind me of? And I thought back 44 years earlier, when another Black, male, Southern power broker delivered another powerful speech as such for another Democratic presidential challenger who ultimately beat a Republican presidential incumbent. And that person was Daddy King, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. At the 1976 Democratic National Convention, he delivered the benediction. I remember watching it. I was in college at the time. He delivered the benediction for Jimmy Carter that rocked the house. And involuntarily, after he prayed, and I talk about it in the book, people in the Madison Square Garden, where they would begin to link arms and start singing, "We Shall Overcome." And I read a book called PR as in President, written by a Republican strategist, who said that the result of Daddy King's benediction was the whole focus of the Republican campaign to try to counterbalance that emotional high that swept Jimmy Carter into the White House.
And that's a good point. I was listening to an interview by Sam Donaldson, who was I believe he was an NBC, either an ABC or NBC news correspondent. And in the interview, of course, he's reflecting on his time during that 1980 election. This is 4 years after the scenario you're talking about in 1980, when Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, is running against Ronald Reagan. And Jimmy Carter gets the news that he will, lose the election because it was an early election night. It was not late. It was a Reagan landslide very early that night. And so Jimmy Carter says, the most painful moment of this whole campaign process was listening to Jerry Falwell say, finally, we'll have a Christian in the White House. He said that really hurt.
Yeah.
And so, just to pinpoint of what your point just now in terms of the we shall overcome emotional high that seemed to fuel the Jimmy Carter rise. Of course, there was also the backlash with Watergate and other factors to consider. But I just thought that was interesting because we also see after that the rise of televangelism. And so do you address televangelism at all? Or if not, what are your thoughts on that as it pertains to politics during the Reagan era? And are we entering a point where that kind of stronghold that the conservative movement had on the right, is that waning in any way to you?
Well, what I am seeing, televangelism is a powerful, powerful tool, certainly because we have more technology and more television. We're seeing much more televising of the gospel, and that's important. I think it's very, very good, Mike, and we should embrace it. When the Bible tells us, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world as a witness to all nations, people my age grew up with tents and crusades and that kind of a thing. Little did we realize how powerful the ministry of Jesus Christ would go through the television and the internet airwaves. As with anything, it can be abused, it can be misused, and we've also seen that happen. What we are seeing now, Michael, in my estimation, is the fact of watching those who lost the election trying to claim that they did not lose the election, claim that it was stolen. I just wrote a piece this week on Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, to me, is kind of like Simon Peter. She was, like he was, a right-wing zealot. But in this instance we're witnessing in Congress, she told the truth. And what was important is that Jesus told his disciples, you will be brought before governors and kings for my sake as a witness, but don't take any thought of what you may say. I will give you your words. I'm not a fan or a supporter of much of what Liz Cheney says, but when it comes to telling the truth, as she is doing, she's exposing the big lie. And the other thing that she is doing is the Bible says in Matthew 5:44, love your enemies, because our enemies help to, our response to our enemies helps to sharpen our focus and give us another viewpoint. What she is doing, in my judgments, very stealthily, is she's giving her party another viewpoint, because if they keep thinking like they're thinking and doing what they're doing, there are a lot more elections that they're going to be losing.
So, sir, if you would, could you walk us through, as time is running short with us, could you walk us through, this latest work of yours? More specifically, how does each chapter's title ask a political question that gets answered by a best practice from the Bible?
Well, for example, in chapter 1, the question was, why did American voters elect Biden and Harris? The answer, I say, was in the story of the woman with the issue of blood. Then I also throw in the fact that ask James Brown, because James Brown's most popular song was, wow, I feel good, da 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 da. American voters felt good about Biden and Harris. And it's all getting proved over and over again, Mike, with what we're seeing in the polls, what we're seeing with stimulus check, what we're seeing with the infrastructure package, what we're seeing with the fight against the COVID-19. Chapter 2 raised the question, why did Biden pick Harris? And I parallel Biden and Harris at the first debate with Jesus and the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. In chapter 3, I raised the question, who propelled Biden to victory? Who won the White House? And there I compare Naaman the leper, the incurable leper, to Joe Biden, the incurable loser, and compare those two. In chapter 4, I raised the question, who was the father of the Black Lives Matter movement that really propelled young people and minorities into the election process that brought the victory. And there I talk about Jesus talking to his disciples and saying there was never a man born of a woman like John. Here he was talking about John the Baptist, and I paralleled John the Baptist to John Lewis, who was the father of the Black Lives Matter movement, he was the silver medalist behind Dr. King. We talk about Dr. King's speech, I Have a Dream, but right before his speech, John Lewis spoke. In chapter 5, I raised the question, who were the essential people behind the scenes? Number one, it was Dr. Anthony Fauci. Number two, it was Nurse Sandra Lindsay, the sister from Jamaica who was the first vaccinee. And also was Dr. Alistair Martin from Massachusetts General Hospital, who began registering voters in the ER at the hospital, and also postal workers who behind the scene made sure that people could get their mail-in ballots. And then I also raised the question in chapter 6, how did he go from TV's Trump, you're fired, to American voters saying, Trump, you're fired? And I talk about the how and the why and the when Donald Trump lost the election. And the point that I make in the book that one will have to read, he didn't lose the election on November 3rd. He actually lost the election on October 7th.
So I'm curious to know, this civil war, as President Biden had termed it, that the GOP seems to be experiencing right now. And there obviously is a winner in that, Liz Cheney's chastised while Trump is embraced, even though Trump has, under the leadership of Trump, the GOP has not done well electorally. You just can't argue with that fact. I mean, you lost the Senate just more recently. 2 years before that, you lose the House and you lose the U.S. presidency just last November. Are there any parallels with someone who has such a stronghold on an audience, the way Trump seems to have in the Bible?
Yes. What I've noticed, and I wrote a piece last week called "Voter Suppression" and the captivating cookie jar. There's a thing called the law of unintended consequences that says those things that you try so hard to do never really happen. The parallel to that comes from Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 1, when along came a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And he saw all of these Israelites and said, these people are going to overpower us. We got to do something to contain them. Let's devise a plan, which became that 400-year enslavement of the Israelites. It didn't work. They increased in numbers and ultimately led to their liberation. What we are watching, Michael, with the voter suppression move, it will not succeed. Why? Because all of us, and even you, Michael, probably remember the experience growing up where your parents said to you as they were leaving the house, help yourself to anything you see in the kitchen, but don't go in the cookie jar. The only thing that was on your mind was going in the cookie jar because you were denied something. When you are trying to, as the GOPs are doing, trying to deny young people and people of color the right to vote, 47 out of 50 states now are putting in legislation, they will not succeed in stopping the vote. Because when you tell people they can't do something, all that does is fuel us. I remember here in Huntsville in 2012, they took 3 of our voting precincts and squeezed them into one with the thought of maybe that would be a disincentive to us going to vote. No, all our voting precincts, those 3 got into one, were squeezed into Oakwood University Church. I was in that group. Even though the polls officially closed at 7 o'clock, we were wrapped around the church and the religion complex. The last voter, if you're in line at 7 o'clock, you get to vote. The last person got to vote at 9 p.m. that evening. We were not going to be denied. And so I don't know what makes the GOP think that these voter suppression tactics are going to work. They will not work. And the Bible proves it's not going to work because Pharaoh tried to suppress the Israelites in enslavement, and they actually grew. All the GOP has to do is read the Bible and biblical best practices. They will not win.
So, Mr. Alston, before I let you go, I have to ask, how can members of the audience get a copy or a digital copy or even a printed copy of your book, as well as the new audiobook for the U.S. Coronavirus Crisis and the Rise of the Civil Metal Leaders, the book that we talked about last time? Could you share how we can get access to that?
Very simply, Michael, and thank you for asking. All they have to do is go to Amazon. Go to Amazon. My books are listed there on Amazon. The digital copy of on this side, yeah, the digital copy of the U.S. coronavirus crisis, also the print version of it right there, and also the audiobook version. If they also go to Amazon, they will also be able to get a copy of this book, The U.S. Politics and the Rise of Silver Medal Leaders. Hopefully before the end of the month, I'll have the print version of U.S. Politics out, and sometime later in the month of June on Amazon, and probably also get on my website, I will also have the audiobook version. I look forward to people getting those books, reading those books, seeing the message of God come through with politics simply being the backdrop, and I would definitely appreciate them writing a book review and leaving it on Amazon.
And lastly, Mr. Alston, what is your next work? Do you have anything in the works right now? And if so, could you share some light on what we should look for in the future?
Well, Mike, you always have a habit of trying to pull out of me what I don't really want to share, but because it's you, counselor, I will share that. The next book I have intended is called Pro Basketball, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders. I'm a basketball junkie, unapologetically. And here I talk about Kyrie Irving versus Steph Curry. I also talk about my basketball hero, Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain. I also talk about Michael Jordan versus Scottie Pippen, because the parallels there between one being a silver medal leader, such Steph Curry, who took a back seat to bring in Kevin Durant to win championships, and the role of Bill Russell, who took a back seat as a scorer in high school, college, and the Olympics so that others could score and 6 other people could become in the Hall of Fame, and they won championships, and how Wilt Chamberlain took a back seat from being the scoring person he was to becoming the assist man, and the Philadelphia 76ers in 1966-67 won their first championship. And so the parallels about silver medal leaders are all over. We just have to look. And the Bible has best practices to back up that, because Jesus is the ultimate silver medal leader, because if there could be no us without Jesus, in achieving his number oneness, embracing his number two-ness.
Well, Mr. Alston, it's a privilege and an honor again to have you back on the show. I want to encourage the audience members to go ahead on Amazon, as he instructed, and look for his book, U.S. Politics, The Rise of Silver Medal Leaders. Very interesting work. And if you're interested, get the first one too, U.S. Coronavirus, Rise of Silver Medal Leaders. Mr. Alston, thank you so much. Now we're going to go ahead and tune our attention to our dynamic panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and much success to you, lawyer.
Well, folks, we got a big show tonight. Hold on a second. Folks, we've got a big show tonight. We've got so much to discuss, as always. But just to recap on the unpredictable week we just experienced, we're talking about the White House seeking to calm the public's panic in terms of buying Southeast oil because of the gas stations in that region running dry. And then we have Representative Liz Cheney saying she would not remain silent despite being ousted as the number 3 GOP leader in the House of Representatives. We've got Senate Democrats being skeptical of extending $300 of unemployment benefits, and the Senate GOP gearing up for a vote reform fight. And we've got, even on the gubernatorial side, candidate Youngkin seeking to reverse the GOP's Trump-era carnage. So much to dive into, such unpredictable topics. But I'm also excited to have this dynamic panel tonight. Some are familiar faces and some are new, and so that's what makes me excited. Always great to have new faces. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a new face on the show, a favorite professor of mine, Professor Raul. He was actually my housing discrimination professor, Professor Raul Andrews Jr. Professor Raul Andrews Jr. Esquire is a senior attorney, nonprofit executive, and an adjunct law professor at the Howard University School of Law. Among other civic engagements, he is an executive board member of the Bar Association of DC, the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust, and the national chairman of public policy for Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. And I want to disclose that even though Professor Raul is present here tonight, his presence in no way is an endorsement of the AARP or that nonprofit organization or at all. He's strictly here in his own capacity, representing his own views, and I'm thankful that he's here to do so. So, Professor Raul, I'm glad to have you on the show. I'm going to now turn my attention a little bit to another new face, Tope Aladatimi. Tena Tope is a recent law school graduate from Howard University School of Law. She was just hooded this past Friday, May 7th, 2021. Her areas of interests are in employment law, civil rights law, and environmental law. At Howard Law School, she served as the president of the African Law Students Association and was a member of the Movement Lawyering Clinic, the Human and Civil Rights Clinic, and the Environmental Justice Center. She's also submitted an amicus brief to the Supreme Court and has sent letters to the United Nations on issues of protester rights and police violence. Tena Tope is looking forward to embarking on her legal journey, doing public interest work. And on a personal note, I've served with Tope in these capacities too. I've witnessed her brilliance up close. So that's what really makes me excited to have her views represented tonight. And I want to turn my attention to someone who is a friend of the Political Mic, who's commonly on here, and someone who's every time she's on here, it's a dynamic show, and that's Jasmine Bonner, who was born and raised in the Gateway to the West, St. Louis, Missouri. Upon graduation from one of two historically Black colleges and universities in Missouri, Harris-Stowe State University, Jasmine moved to Washington, D.C. to pursue a career serving the people of her hometown as a congressional intern for former Congressman William Lacey Clay Jr., who serves in Missouri's 1st District. After the completion of her internship, Jasmine became staff assistant for Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York's 10th Congressional District, and who is also the chairman of the House Committee on the Judiciary. Currently, Jasmine serves as special assistant for United States Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. By serving in these roles over the last 3 years, Jasmine witnessed essential hearings that laid the foundation for the case of the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. She is also one of the very few personal staffers to be present actually on the Senate floor during the trial of the former president. As a result, Jasmine has had the unique opportunity to see firsthand the entire impeachment process from inception to reality. In addition to her time spent as a staffer in both the House and Senate, she currently serves as the president for the Senate Black Legislative Staff Caucus, which is a 2021 and also a 2021 University of Texas at Austin LBJ Women's Campaign School changemaker, and a steadfast advocate for upward mobility of HBCU. So Jasmine, it goes without saying that she's someone who's engaged, someone who is very knowledgeable as it pertains to public policy, and someone who is just in the arena. So it's exciting to have her back. And then I want to go ahead and introduce again Mr. Egwu Nwangpa. It's always a privilege and an honor to have him on the show. Egwu Nwangpa was a vice president of one of the largest financial service institutions in the world. But currently, he actually just accepted a position. And this position is actually at Cushman and Wakefield. And he starts on Monday. So he's no longer with Bank of America, but this is a huge opportunity, and we're glad to have someone from the private sector also represented on the panel tonight. But Mr. Nwangpa was also a manager in the Dilatoy's Financial Services Group of Dilioty and Touche LLP. That in that role, he provided auditing, accounting, and advisory services to both public and private clients, inclusive of banks, broker deals, and mortgage banks. Egwu has also more than 20 years of combined relevant experience in the realms of internal audit and advisory services, vendor management, and diversity. Mr. Nwangpa, thank you for being back. I'm so excited to have you back, sir. And last but not least for the night will be Camilla Ahmad, who is a former director of the campus programs and regional political director for former Senator Doug Jones during his U.S. Senate tenure. Kamala is also a social worker, visual artist, and a political activist from San Francisco, California. She's a graduate of Oak University. She's a part of the class of 2017. Camilla has a background in social work with field experience in medical social work, human rights advocacy, crisis services, and child welfare. She serves as an elected member of the Alabama Democratic Party's executive board and is currently working as a campaign consultant and pursuing a master's in public administration with a concentration in public policy. I can't, this panel is so it's outstanding. But I want to dive right into, one of the biggest headlines of the day, and that is the removal of Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming from being the number 3 top GOP member in the House. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to what this means for the future of the Republican Party. Folks have been characterizing this as a full embrace of the Trump wing of the party and a rejection of the Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney's wing of the party. And there are a lot of people who have created some speculation as to what this would mean for the next midterm election, because all eyes seem to be diverted to that already. Now, I want to ask you panelists, in your view, what is so significant about the removal of Liz Cheney in the long term? What does this mean for the party going forward? Will the party remain viable to win elections in moderate areas because of the fact that Trump lost? And as I talked with Tim Alston, not just lost himself, but he caused the GOP to lose the Senate in this last election, and even before that, the House in 2018. Anyone can jump in. I'm excited to get your thoughts on this.
I'll be first. It was interesting, really, that someone who has been such a steadfast Republican, literally up until a few months ago, is now being scapegoated as the worst thing that ever happened to the party. It's a reminder of the fundraising capability and the ability to rise up a portion that's loyal to the GOP that they weren't able to reach before. The disenfranchised people in the Republican Party still clinging to the words that they think Donald Trump is saying because he can't even speak on social media, and that's all come to be the foil of Liz Cheney, who's likely pushed right into the 2024 presidential campaign as of today, almost officially.
So what's also interesting is that in the meeting, which, by the way, it's noteworthy that this vote was taken in secret. Liz Cheney had said, I promise you this, after today, I will be leading to the fight to restore our party and our nation to conservative principles, to defeating socialism, to defending our public, to making the GOP worthy again of being a party of Lincoln. She also, according to sources in the room, ended her remarks in a prayer, citing a Bible verse, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Now, to me, this is just liberating for her, because now, to me, she becomes the most free politician on Capitol Hill right now, even if she loses the election. Remember when John Kasich came on the DNC stage, which was such a big deal for a Republican governor who's, you go down his list of public policy issues, he's conservative as it gets. But he found himself still in the midst of the Democratic National Convention making the case against his own party. I'm thinking, down the line, Liz Cheney would not just serve as a thorn in the side, but actually serve as a constant rebuke, an embodiment that is a rebuke to this party. Because when you think of Liz Cheney's voting record, and it's been talked about, she's voted with Trump, I think 70-something% of the time, as opposed to the person, Stefanik, who's going to replace her, who is more moderate, which is amazing because it shows you that the focus is no longer on public policy, it seems. I want to get your thoughts as to, what do you think Liz Cheney's role is going forward and the aftermath of what just took place this past Wednesday? Anyone?
Well, I'll go. Mike, thank you again so much for having me on. I'm always so happy to join you and talk about these incredible topics. In terms of Liz Cheney and where she goes from here, she gets a bigger platform. She's able to talk to those Republicans who, at the beginning, they were so energized by Trump, and now they're very turned off. These are the people that voted for Biden because they felt like they had no other way to vote. So she's going to be using that voice and being able to amplify her voice now without having to worry about the backing of the party, to not worry about whether she's going to be reprimanded for speaking her truth about this president and the big lie, because this is essentially what it's about. They're taking her out of that position because people are still saying that January 6th, it was a result of, patriotism, and that this election was stolen. And because of that, and her speaking her truth, she is now able to, go against the grain. You have people like Kevin McCarthy, who, him and Lindsey Graham, I just really do not know what to do with them. Like, they really do not have a backbone. They kind of like sway with the wind. It's like today they're on this side, the next day they're here, or it's like in the next hour or next 20 minutes, they're wherever you want to blow them, that's where they are. So I feel like she has this incredible backing from Republicans who, came out after, the Women's March, who were crying and complaining about Trump and how he was this and how he was that and how evangelicals didn't agree with him and all the rest of that stuff. So those are the people that Liz Cheney, those are the people that she's communicating to and who she's going to be building her foundation moving forward, not just for midterms, but for the next presidential election.
So veteran GOP Representative Virginia Foxx of North Carolina, who actually introduced a formal resolution to remove Cheney yesterday during this closed door meeting, said the old saying for leaders is, if no one is following you, you're only taking a walk. And she said, you, Liz Cheney, are only taking a walk. I want to get your thoughts on, this notion that, the stance that Liz Cheney took. And all, when you look at this, it's crazy that the fact that you're saying that the election was not stolen, that's it. That's the grounds for this whole thing. That's really what's, driving this whole move, this dramatic effort to remove her, which, it also goes to show that the Republicans who were reluctant to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene, it wasn't that they didn't want to turn on their own. It was just that they had priorities, and that one wasn't part of their priorities because at the same time she was walking lockstep with Trump. But I want to get your thoughts on this mischaracterization of Cheney's role of leadership. Do you think this will be effective, characterizing this as just a quote unquote walk?
So I was just going to say that I completely disagree with that. I feel like Liz Cheney is taking a very powerful stance in, going against what majority of her party and constituents want, because they do, and they are still siding with Trump. So I feel like, if anything, similar to what Jasmine was saying, there are quite a few Republicans who, don't like Trump and don't support him. And I feel like she is appealing to this new side of things, especially because ever since Trump, and his presidency, the Republican Party completely changed, and there was a lot of tension within the party. And so I feel like now with Liz Cheney speaking out, I feel like she's going to really appeal to these other people who are not sure about, their future with the Republican Party. And I think that, if anything, her platform is going to get larger, and she's going to serve as a leader for those individuals.
And to also just like jump in really quickly, let us not forget that Liz Cheney's job as the number 3 in the Republican Party was to help set an agenda and priorities for their party, which now seems like their party and the agenda is to continue this lie, to go over into the midterm to try to get more seats back. And because she went against that agenda, she no longer is serving her purpose. So it's time for her to go. So that's like something that I'm constantly being very mindful of when thinking about how flimsy these arguments are and these Republicans are when it comes to talking about their morals and their values and structure and different things like that.
Yeah, and let me jump back in before we jump off this topic because it's sensitive. I went to sleep one night this week agreeing with Liz Cheney, and that was a tough night of sleep for me because I never thought that would happen in this world. Let's not take anything away from political calculation, right? Even all the people who she's going against right now who believe the big lie, if she was ever to become the candidate, they would all vote for her. Right now, she's making a play for the middle. She's making a play to appear reasonable. She's making a play to be in the direction of people that people consider serious. So I won't give it all to her as, her shining moment of having this this feeling of patriotism, but I put some of it towards political calculus.
Camilla, I think you're going to say something.
I'm trying to. I think going back to the question about what does this mean for the GOP, I almost want to ask them that question, right? Like, what does this mean for you guys? How are we moving forward? Because we talked about it before with the removal of Trump from the office. There was almost some sort of there was some friction there, right? Because the GOP was sort of claiming and making their like stance very clear that at the end of the day, our loyalty is to the GOP. So then to sort of like reprimand and exile in many ways, someone who then makes, from what I understand, the situation, anti-Trump rhetoric, right? In any way, someone who is not in a position of power any longer, an official one at least, what message does that then send? And so what will the future look like? And so with the statement that was made previously, what was it? What did they say? Oh, the walk, about it being a walk. I almost agree with them because it almost sounds like them telling her what's about to happen, like we are standing back. Good luck, because in those positions, generally you have like party solidarity, right? You're looking to support each other. You have like your united front. You're speaking on the issues that you've all agreed to back and speak on. And so it's kind of like a very good luck. And I think we've seen in the past couple of years, the idea of appealing to the logic or the reason, if you don't have the power backing really of your entire party, it will even be tough to appeal to the logic or reason of people, because they will do anything in their power to make sure that message stops at you. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes forward. I think it's a very brave move on her part, because it likely will be a lonely road, especially if you've been working together for so long. So it'll be interesting to see the direction that goes in. Yeah.
So there's this also counter argument that some Republicans have been making. I've heard Jim Jordan say it in an MSNBC interview. McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, who may win the speakership if things go well for the GOP next year, also made this argument, and that is, relitigating the past, bringing up this whole debacle about whether the election was stolen or not. That's only hurt. That's not productive. Let's just keep moving. But in honesty, they never really addressed that. They just kept moving forward, and January the 6th happened. In the wave of emotion, everyone was in agreement in the immediate aftermath of that. And then as time starts to alleviate some of the close trauma memory that these folks have, then all of a sudden we're back into this position where everyone's going to their separate corners, and you have two separate ideas as to what took place. McCarthy said, each day spent relitigating the past is one less day we have to seize the future. He wrote this in a letter to his colleagues ahead of the vote that took place yesterday. He said, if we are to succeed in stopping the radical Democrat agenda from destroying our country, these internal conflicts need to be resolved so as not to detract from the efforts of our collective team. And then you also have Representative Ken Buck of Colorado saying, that basically the same thing. He's a member of the House Freedom Caucus who voted to certify the election results. I want to get your thoughts on this idea that, any kind of talk about this, was it stolen, was it not stolen, just should be avoided altogether, because this is just not productive.
I don't know. Coming from a group that investigated Benghazi for years, and anything that they can get their hands on, it turns into a marathon of 15, 20 investigations, even if none of them turn up anything. I would have to come to the conclusion that they're avoiding something because they see the danger there. They know that the coming investigations that the Democrats have for them are likely to turn up close ties to not only the inaction or the actions on January 6th, and most of them, well, I shouldn't say most of them, but many of them will have their hands dirty in it. I think one of the things that we're noticing in its totality is that the GOP is very good at sticking together and sticking to a story, and that's a level of discipline that the Democrats would do well to learn.
To your point, I'm thinking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was way before the Trump era. Jasmine?
No, I was totally going to agree. I was definitely going to say that regardless of how true it is or not, regardless of if their leadership is saying to stay away from it, you have those people that are still going to continue to tote that because they have people in their district that eat that up. That is their bread and butter. They love hearing that. They love being fired up. They love being told that Democrats are evil and they're the ones that are taking their health care and, not allowing them to be able to do the things that they want to do. So there is going to continue. I do think that as we continue on and prepare for the midterms, Democrats are going to have to find their messaging in trying to not like hold them accountable, but to also say, listen, we're moving forward and our attention does not need to be on these people in these offices. We need to make sure that we're getting those voter reform bills and stuff pushed through, because that's the real problem. That's why all of this is going on. That's why the GOP is deflecting and all the rest of this stuff. There are Republicans in these state legislatures that are putting past all of these voting rights laws that are making it incredibly hard for people of color and different precincts all across this country to be able to vote in the midterm election. That's why you see them continuing to tote this big fat lie as if it is the Bible. Honestly, that is going to be the main reason why you see so many Republicans energized to go out to vote next year for the midterms.
I also feel like, there is this fear of not wanting to go back to the past because, there is, they also want to protect, the integrity of the political system. And if there is any question about whether or not the election was fraudulent, that's something that takes away from the legitimacy of the system. But I do agree that, this is going to continue. Whether there's an investigation or not, there's going to be people who still hold these conspiracy theories. So it's distracting us from a lot of the more pressing issues that affect people who look like us. So I just feel like, in regards to priority, these are the more pressing issues that should be of focus, especially with this new administration, and not going back to be distracted by, all of the gander and everything.
So Camilla, go ahead.
I was just going to say really quickly, there are also people who ran on these fallacies, right? So there's also a level of maintenance that we're doing as a party too, because it's funny they're calling it like a big lie. It's because we kind of have to differentiate, because there were a lot of lies going through. This just happened to be the big one, And so I feel like there's also that. There's a whole bunch that went on that they're like, we're going to have to figure messaging out in order to maintain this, because we can't just poof say, you can't say huge things like that and then expect, and then expect that you don't have to then keep figuring that out. It's also really interesting. I know we're going to be talking about voting rights a little bit later. It's also really interesting, the concept of like election fraud. There's something wrong with the election system. And then we're like, hey, what if we fix the election system? They're like, whoa. So that's going to be an interesting conversation too. But yeah.
I do want to pivot to, the Senate fight over voting rights, because, Senate Republicans, we're planning to brand the SR1 bill, which would be the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They were going to brand it as a politically motivated federal takeover of the election system that would make elections more chaotic and less secure. And that, just echoes the insecurity people seem to be expressing about how the last cycle went. And this is according to a messaging document that was circulating circulating to aides by Senate Rules of Republicans that was obtained. So the Senate Republicans were looking to focus on the bill's requirement that states allow voters to fill out a sworn affidavit if they don't have an ID. Republicans argue that would render state voter ID laws meaningless, and they cite that that would be taking power away from the states as well, who have enacted these laws. So they said that the For the People Act actually getting signed into law, has a very slim chance of happening. Senator Joe Manchin still hasn't endorsed it, and even if he eventually does, the bill has no chance of getting the 10 GOP votes needed to overcome the legislative filibuster. Remember that 60 vote threshold that seems to be the magic number now. What are your thoughts on this fight? In terms of how do we move forward? The Democratic side moving forward to push this through if you don't have the 10 votes, and being that you have this, it seems like a national campaign to create insecurity about the way elections are run in this country.
It's really funny. I think the sort of reform that would happen through this bill being described as being chaotic or whatever. And it's like anybody who is labeling it as that, I feel like has not experienced or is coming from a space where they have not experienced firsthand voter suppression, right? Because we remember what 2018 looked like. We remember what 2018 looked like, especially in the South, where we had in northern Alabama during a race that we had worked on up there. We had students, right? Students who technically had registered to vote using a state-issued ID, but because of just a few additional details, 70% of the folks who we had registered to vote had come back as inactive, right? So now they're arriving with additional paperwork that they have to fill out in order for their vote to even count that day, right? Now it's just at one university. And mind you, these are all historically Black universities based in the South, right? And so then in another university, we're also, I want to say that the other number was like 30% of them had come back as inactive. So we're already facing sort of all these things. And then in addition to that, with, if you know anything about like where DMVs or these buildings where people would get these IDs are placed, right? What sort of neighborhoods, which ones had been closed down and stuff like that. So my question always is, it's like when people want to shoot something down but are not concerned with finding some sort of alternative solution, then they're not actually here to find solutions at all. Right? Because if you are still concerned with maintaining the integrity of the voting system, you're also going to be concerned with making sure that everybody has the right to vote and everybody has access to the vote, right? And so by providing then no alternative to that, I'd have to ask you, what do you really want here? Are you looking to help, or are you looking to just shoot down and continue to suppress certain people's votes and maintain power?
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I think, this question is almost not even a question, because the Republicans clearly come out and say if more people vote, we'll lose. Trump has said it. They reiterate it all the time. I don't even understand how it's even a question anymore, because they say it explicitly now. It's not even hiding it like they used to in the 50s and 60s and things like that. Will it get passed? I really believe that the key to more stuff being passed is going to be not really capitulating to the Republican requests, but going forward with these investigations. There was a push in the first 100 days of the Biden administration to get things done. There's always a push to see how much we can get done, how many things we can do, how much landmark things we can do to prove to our voters that we are in Washington doing what they sent us to do. Now is the legislative part. This is the time when the elbows get ashy and people get down to work. And I would like for the Biden people to not really think about what they can do to get this passed, but really do a PR campaign and do something to kind of move things a little bit more than they are. Because right now we're still dealing with an ex-president's not being able to get on Facebook in Florida. We're still talking about whether we should prosecute people for breaking and entering into our nation's capital, scaling walls, beating policemen to near death or to death, and spraying things in their eyes and assaulting people. We're still dealing with that. And those would normally be open and shut cases if it was the other way around, right? If it was some liberal people who jumped the walls and scaled walls and sprayed bear spray in people's eyes, we'd be talking death penalty. Right now, we're talking about, can we prosecute them at all, and wasting a lot of time. But this is something that I would like not to shame the Republicans into doing, but to come out on record to say that they don't want more people to vote, and they don't want the democratic process to be inclusive of all people. I think would be something that would be a powerful a message in the midterms.
So I have to ask this question. Can Democrats actually get this bill passed before the midterms? Is time against them in this respect?
I wouldn't waste. I hate to say it because this is such a major portion, but there's so many priorities. I mean, Democrats are playing from behind. I mean, they literally had 4 years of chaos, right? I mean, everything from the Supreme Court to even the SALT deductions in these northeastern, mainly Democratic states. There's just a pandemic going on. There's so much that the Democrats have in front of them. I don't know where to start. So I would say any of them, a victory on any of them is a victory on all of them, in my opinion.
Anyone else?
I'll be the optimistic person and say I pray that that's something that can happen. Just being a congressional staffer, you always just hope, whether it's something small, like somebody go and talk to their representative and say, listen, this is how this has impacted me, or somebody gets it in their ear to help persuade them to support this legislation. We always hold out that hope, or, being able to kind of like negotiate. You give me this, we'll be able to give you this on a different bill. We're hoping for those things. And, I'm going to be optimistic and say, I really do hope that it gets passed. John Lewis was a giant, and everything that he stood for, it's in this bill. He died basically begging for our democracy to be saved. So knowing those things, you would hope that people can, put aside all the foolishness and do that. But like it was said earlier, if more people turn out to vote, Republicans know they're going to lose. So that is why I really think this, it won't pass. But I'm always holding out that hope.
And also when we're doing things like making it illegal to pass out water to elderly people who have been standing in line for over 6 hours in order to vote, like, it's very clear again, you just don't want people voting. And I think that it's just unfortunate.
I think that's an example. That's an example of how people don't know either, because the vast majority of Americans have no idea that people actually would wait 6 hours to vote, because they walk in, they vote, they get their sticker, and they're home. They're in their car before their ice cream can melt that they just bought from Baskin Robbins. So it's one of those things where it's a local thing where local people have to make a bigger noise to show people what's actually going on in their part of town. Because I don't think people who are not minorities or not black have ever stayed in line for 6 hours, 7 hours to vote.
So, as a recent law graduate, and I'm sure, Tope has the same concern, I'm thinking, even if this bill passes, right, even if you get the For the People Act to be passed into law, are we headed for a scenario where the now 6-3 conservative, Supreme Court will strike it down because it says, they say, well, this is a violation of the states' rights. Because remember, once they removed Section 4B and Section 5 from the Voting Rights Act, it was kind of like off to the races for states to enact laws like the bill enacted in Georgia, like the bill that Ron DeSantis signed on, in front of the Fox News cameras last week. Are we headed for that scenario in your view, or are we looking at a situation where legislation can be carefully crafted to ensure that, can kind of skirt around any kind of possible argument that the Supreme Court can make about an infringement of voting rights on the state's part. Don't all jump in.
I'll definitely leave that for you lawyers. I'm the lonely businessman to talk about. Yeah.
I could go. I feel like, there always is that possibility that the now the conservative Supreme Court can strike it down. There's definitely going to be attempts with cases being brought to the Supreme Court for that purpose. But, again, I feel like because of how ridiculous a lot of the cases, such as making it illegal to pass around water bottles when folks are standing in line to vote, it comes to a point where it's undeniably voter suppression, just due to the extremity of these cases. Because things like that, just passing around water, that's ridiculous. I feel like the reasonable person can agree to that. So, if there is a case that is brought to the Supreme Court, who really can know. But I feel like I'm optimistic in that the bill won't be shut down by the court.
And that's a good point. I was thinking, also, the factors that we had to go through in the environmental justice clinic. One of them was that, if there's a substantial likelihood that this has a particular impact on a specific demographic, and if there's a history behind it, we have a history of voter discrimination in this country that you don't have to go far to find. And then, you obviously will have a specific demographic targeted differently than the others if this bill, takes flight and we start to see the effects of it in oncoming elections. And so I would think that's a legitimate argument to make in terms of saying, well, the Supreme Court needs to reevaluate the way it's looking at these voting bills. The states can't have just unrestricted power as it pertains to this voting, as it pertains to folks' voting rights under the Due Process Clause, under the Equal Protection Clause. And we saw, these kinds of arguments being made on behalf of the conservative party as it pertained to Bush versus Gore. Remember, the argument there was that this was an infringement of equal protection rights because votes counted differently in different counties somehow are a violation of these rights. So I think it's going to be interesting going forward. But regardless, both sides, the stakes couldn't be higher for both sides as it pertains to this issue. But I want to pivot a little bit to an issue that I've had to deal with even on my way to do this show, and that is the fact that we're dealing with the gasoline shortage. Gasoline shortages caused by panic buying after the shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline spread across the southeast region of the United States Wednesday, as the Biden administration sought to reassure consumers it was easing a raft of rules to speed delivery of the fuel supplies. The pipeline shipments were stopped on Friday after a ransomware attack on the company's IT systems, prompting drivers in several states to swarm to gas stations, one of which I just came out of, in several states to swarm to other gas stations, draining inventories and leading the White House to waive pollution rules. And I want to get your thoughts. Is the Biden administration adequately addressing this issue? Is this something that they should have seen coming? Is this something that they should have prepared for in advance? I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, here we go again with another cyber attack that we've been saying was coming for decades, and now it's here, and we're not unprepared. I think Biden administration can do everything to put a Band-Aid on it, but it's something that is a long-term cancer that hasn't been dealt with, and that's that we are vulnerable to cyber attacks. We have to put as much money as we're putting into building bombs, building aircraft carriers, into making the country safe from cyber attacks. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know. We keep falling into this every few months, and panic buying is the new stimulus for these organizations, these companies. So I didn't see any of the companies like Mobil, Exxon, or any of them coming out and with warnings not to, for people to put gas in plastic bags and Tupperware containers and things like that, which is probably what needs to happen rather than Joe Biden. Who is he to speak to people in states that didn't vote for him?
So I'm also going to just put it out there. The previous office holder made it to where we cannot, put resources into the programming that we need to make sure these things don't happen, right? We had the last 4 years of there wasn't a cyber attack. There wasn't any attacks on our elections in 2016 when everything pointed to that, that actually did happen. So when you go from laying the foundation like the Obama administration and probably the administration before that and trying to build up that arsenal and the resources to try to, combat these things if it happens. And then you have somebody that comes into the office and is like, well, no, that's not true. These things are fake. And they drain all of that money, all of those resources to put all of that money towards military and guns and helicopters and parades to show that we're strong. You're taking away from the things that we actually need, which are those digital infrastructures to be able to combat that. And we also can talk about how, Republicans and the GOP love talking about the government shouldn't be involved in some of these business entities and how they run their business and things like that. But then stuff like this happens and then they're like, help, we need help. Can somebody help me? You can't have it both ways. Like there needs to be structure for you to be held accountable when these things happen. So we're not the ones that are responsible for getting you out of this mess. And then when you're out of it, you're like, phew. Now we can go back to doing what we were doing before y'all, helped us get out of this mess in the first place. There needs to be some type of accountability for those organizations and those corporations who are not allowing these things, but aren't putting those safeguards in place to be able to combat these type of cyber attacks.
Yeah, I think especially going off of what Jasmine said, especially right now, after the year that we had in 2020, after the election, after the Capitol storming, and unfortunately, and even still suffering from a lot of what the pandemic brought to us in terms of health, safety, economic issues, we're kind of really, really needing to make sure that we are maintaining, the U.S. citizens, like sort of, what's the word? Just their trust in their own in public safety, right? So we're facing all these things and people are starting to find like that hope, that comfort. They're starting to become settled again. And now people are like, girl, I didn't even know the gas could get hacked. These are just new things that we didn't even, know to see coming. Just another thing to add to the list. So I think that they're not understanding the impact it is just on like our if nothing else, the public's view on how much we actually have in control right now.
But I also want to say this. The Biden administration is putting out so many different fires at once. I'm not saying that they can't be held accountable, but I'm also saying we have to extend them a little, not much, a little bit of grace, because they are literally unraveling all of the threads that Trump and his cronies left behind, the mess with our climate, when we're talking about the things that happened with the arms deal that they pulled us away from. So many different little things that the everyday people don't know about, that lawmakers know about, that are dealing with military infrastructure. When you talk about that ridiculous tax cut, all of those things, they're trying to undo all of that. And now this is just something else that they have to worry about. So we have to give them a little bit, not much, but a little bit of grace to try to figure this out. And then, let's say a couple more days, if they haven't really given us a solid plan, then we can say, listen, y'all got to get it together, okay? Y'all didn't do it, Joe. Y'all didn't do it. We need y'all to do it, okay?
So, this is significant because, for folks wondering what's so important about the Colonial Pipeline, the shutdown of this pipeline which supplies nearly half the gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel consumed on the East Coast alone, has raised question of whether the federal government has had adequate oversight, as we've been discussing, of the cyber risks facing U.S. infrastructure. And, you know, I want to also point to the fact that, remember the transition period, you really had a non-cooperative incumbent administration work. You know, they were not cooperative in terms of handing off vital information to the incoming administration. And when you go back to the 2001 transition between Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, the CIA actually pinpointed that the prolonged process of that election, you know, remember it was until December 7th, I believe, that Al Gore actually conceded because of the Supreme Court ruling, Bush versus Gore, all of that drama that took place actually contributed to the elevation of time. And then terrorists were able to plot even more undetected, which led to the September 11th attacks the following year. So this is very important. You know, it's not like we're reaching for some kind of reason to blame Trump. We're seeing that there are consequences, real tangible consequences of not having outgoing and incoming administrations cooperating with each other and handing off vital important information. I think that also played a role as it pertains to the cyber attack. Any other thoughts before we transition real quick?
I think there's a normal gas price raise around this time of year anyway, leading into Memorial Day. It's the most traveled weekend of the year. You're always, gas prices are going to spike. This is a little bit abnormal because of the cut down of the pipeline. I just think the word pipeline itself has been used as a political hammer. Everyone thinks of the Keystone Pipeline and the thousands of jobs that were promised with it that really were only hundreds of jobs and really were still going to really neglect and put us in a place where we weren't. So I think the word pipeline is being used and people are going back to Keystone when they think of this.
So another interesting topic is that Senate Democrats are actually signaling that they are unlikely to extend the $300 federal weekly unemployment benefit past the month of September, especially if the economy continues to improve. Senate Majority Leader now, Chuck Schumer, said during a press conference 2 days ago, Tuesday, that there was overwhelming support among Democrats to keep providing the additional money to existing unemployment insurance, but not every member of his caucus is on board with this, particularly after last week's weaker than expected April jobs report. Senator Joe Manchin, in particular, said that he's not willing to actually extend these benefits past September 6th. He said, in quote, "I'll never vote for another extension as long as I know that the vaccines. As long as I know that with the vaccines, there's not an excuse for no one to be vaccinated." He said, "I understand there's millions of jobs in America that we can't fill right now, so we need people back to work. That's more and more people understanding. There's more and more people understanding that we're in trouble." He previously expressed hesitation over the benefit. You also have Senate Republicans who are not expected to support another extension. So without Manchin's vote, Democrats wouldn't be able to pass the added benefit through reconciliation. So there's also some hesitation among moderates in the House. And when asked whether House Democrats had the votes to extend benefits, one moderate Democrat responded, "God, I hope not." I want to get your response on, what this motive could possibly be behind moderate Democrats not voting for an extension of the $300 unemployment check, because I'm under the assumption that, look, if you produce results for folks, that's really what's going to help you in the long run in terms of political advantage. People want to see results, and especially in times of crisis, and especially in times of unemployment, widespread unemployment, they want to see the government doing something on their behalf. And so I want to get your thoughts as to what you could possibly make sense of in terms of any possible motive behind moderate Democrats taking this position. And, where do you see, do you see any kind of likely path for there to be any kind of extension of this, being that Manchin has taken the position he has, and without his vote and without the Republicans, reconciliation doesn't seem to be possible?
I think when we're thinking about those benefits and who they impact, you have to think about the people that that look like all of us on the screen, right? These are the people that had those essential worker jobs that may or may not have been laid off because they contracted COVID and they no longer can work because they have after effects of COVID. So they're needing some type of income to come in to help them stay afloat, even if it's $300. Those $300 matter to those people in whatever state that is. So when we're talking about this and we're having this discussion, we do know that whenever there is something that is not too good to be true, when there's something that's going on, you're always going to have some bad actors that are taking advantage or abusing a certain system. We're seeing that with these PPP loans, people that are claiming to have businesses, but they ain't got no businesses, they ain't got no license, they don't have anything. But because they're in such a dire need for money, they're willing to do whatever it takes to be able to feed their children. And unfortunately, a lot of them may not feel like they can rely on their member of Congress to speak up for them or have their back or kind of go through the proper channels to negotiate and do all of these things. That's taking too long. By the time you're done negotiating and trying to kiss the feet of the king, me and my kids laying out on the highway with nowhere to go. So I'm thinking like that is why, like, I think a lot of these members aren't being mindful of that. They're not being mindful that you have people that are really struggling. Like, I know personally, there are a lot of people that I know that are dealing with after effects of COVID. They still have a lot of the symptoms. They're having coughs. They're having chills, COVID toe, all of that different stuff. They are still dealing with that. And because of that, they're not able to work. They're not able to work at their grocery store. They're not able to work at their little mom and pop shop. So they have to do what they can to be able to survive. So unfortunately, they're seeing a lot of different reports and things come out that people are abusing that system. And that may be one of the reasons why they're wanting to go ahead and sever those ties in September.
So I have several thoughts about this. First of all, I feel like, there has to be that question as to why. And I feel like the moderate Democrats, the reason why they don't want to extend the unemployment benefits is because they feel like this is going to disincentivize folks to work, and that people who are receiving the unemployment checks are potentially making more than people who actually are working and have a job, and whatever the case may be. But I feel like that doesn't really get to the root of the issue. These employers should be giving people higher wages, letting people be able to, live off. They shouldn't be able to have multiple jobs in order to make the amounts you would get from an unemployment check. And so I feel like there's more structural issues that are at the root cause of these things. And then also accessibility of the vaccine. There's still distrust about the vaccine from the Black community and other communities that have this distrust for the government, quite frankly. And I feel like there's a lot of things that still needs to be addressed and talked about. So with the Democrats now saying that they don't want to extend these employment benefits, I just feel like that's a mistake. And a lot of people are going to suffer from that. A lot of people are still working through, as Jasmine said, the effects of having had COVID. And it's not just that somebody has a vaccine and now everything is fine. Like, that process doesn't happen overnight. So people still need time to get better, to find a job. And even past September, who knows what it's going to look like. Sure, the economy is now getting better, but we still don't know. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. There's still, today, the CDC released another statement about, how masks are to be worn again. So it's like a lot of things are still coming up, and it's just too early to just have all of these employment benefits being taken away from the people who need it the most.
So, Edwin, go ahead.
Yeah, I hate to sound like Andrew Yang, my friend who is running for mayor in New York, but technology has displaced so many jobs and wages have not risen. So this pandemic, one of, I guess if there was any bright side, is it's given a real opportunity for us to use governmental means to right some of the wrongs that technology has wrought all over our economy. And while $300 a week might not be a lot to some people in New York, that's your transportation money for the week. To a lot of people, that is a meaningful sum of money that is going to then go into business. So instead of looking at it as a handout, it's really a stimulus for business. I don't see a lot of people taking that $300 and sitting on it and putting it in an account and investing it in Bitcoin. A lot of people are using that to pay off the bills that they couldn't pay off credit, and buy things that they've been not buying because they didn't have the money. So instead of the Democrats viewing it like that, I would make the case that it's actually going to be a depressant on the economy if those funds all of a sudden disappear from circulation.
I also think it's unfortunate that during one of the largest economic, what's the word? One crises. There we go. One of the largest economic crises that our country has seen in its history. In a space where I feel like we should be doing more, we have people like Senator Manchin trying to figure out how we can do less for the American people. Because we also have to remember, what did we get? A total of $3,200 over the course of almost, if not, May of over a year, right? In terms of economic relief for people who are struggling. And even just with unemployment, there are people who are falling through the cracks there too, where people who didn't necessarily qualify for unemployment, but because they had so much anxiety around COVID, chose to quit their jobs, right? Are now having trouble finding employment after making that decision, but don't qualify for unemployment because they made the choice to quit. There are people like that falling through the cracks every day who are afraid to get their mother, their grandmother, their grandfather sick if they continue to work. Things like that, right? Where they just may not have qualified at the time, depending or on whatever their personal circumstances were. So in a time where I feel like we should be doing everything we can to make sure tax-paying citizens, right, are covered in the event of a crisis, we're instead choosing how we can pay people less, right? How we can do less for people's literal survival, right? Because even we're also the health impact, right? We also have to remember we're paying for healthcare still. We don't know what people's money is going to. So a conversation around $300 almost seems insulting. I almost want to say evil, really, when we're taking away. Y'all feel what I'm saying? Like, I can't even believe that that's a part of the discussion when we're still in a place where we have not by any means recovered from the impact of what we've been through as a nation. So I think that that's really unfortunate on Manchin and everyone else's part who is thinking at all to instead lower the funding that we're providing people.
And just really quickly, let's also remember that during the pandemic, when members were back, they didn't pass that $15 minimum wage to increase it. That could have not, fixed all of our problems, but at least made it a little bit better for everyday Americans to be able to actually afford to live in the cities and the towns that they are in right now. And a lot of people I really don't think a lot of people pay attention to this, but you have members that are millionaires that don't have to worry about that $300 that your big mama need for her insulin or her blood pressure medicine. $300 is like $3 to them. It does not matter to them because they're not the ones that are being affected by it, but the people that are in those cities and those towns are. And I think that is something that we also have to be mindful of when you're calling your member. Like, hey, I know you don't care about me getting my $300, but this is why I care about it or why I need it. So you have to really and we have to encourage more people to make those phone calls and do it constantly, not every once in a while, but constantly, to get that point across that you need not only that $300, but we need to increase the federal minimum wage.
So the last topic of the night, and I really wanted to get to this, is that less than 12 hours after Glenn Youngkin locked down the GOP nomination for Virginia governor on Monday night, former President Donald Trump finds himself worming into the gubernatorial race in that state. He says Glenn is a pro-business, pro-Second Amendment, pro-veterans, pro-America candidate. He knows how to make Virginia's economy rip-roaring, and he has my complete and total endorsement. My first thought was, how are these statements even coming out if he's banned on social media? Who's releasing these things? But besides that, Trump wrote in a statement Tuesday morning that was circulated by his political action committee. His endorsement came after Youngkin seemed to emerge from a contentious nominating battle seeking to lock down the Republican base. But unlike states like Arkansas or South Carolina, which are red states that Trump has already made endorsements in the 2022 gubernatorial race, the former president's support in Virginia carries more risks than benefits, it seems. Remember, the Democratic Party seems to have a stronghold in this state. This is the first time since 1994 where Democrats have complete control of Richmond. When you also have Ralph Northam still in his seat, despite many calls for him to resign in the aftermath of a blackface photo emerging in 2019. I want to get your thoughts, because in addition to this endorsement by Trump, you also have Republicans saying that he needs to actually kind of thread the needle here and kind of do the, not offend the Trump base, but at the same time not offend the moderate traditional Republican base. But you have someone, who works on this campaign saying, he doesn't have the personality. This is Ron White, a Republican State Central Committee member and a co-chair of the Northern Virginia Republican Business Forum. He said he doesn't have the personality. He's a typical suburban dad and a very faith-based Christian. And I want to get your thoughts on, is this a proxy of what to expect in terms of, next year's election cycle? Will we have people who, like candidate Youngkin, don't want or kind of seem a little squeamish to embrace a Trump endorsement? And would that serve against them?
No, if nobody else will go, I'll go. Well, Virginia is always a weird place. You basically have a governor and a lieutenant governor who are both, had calls for them to resign and still managed to swim out of those troubled waters and actually govern and do well, actually, in the aftermath of what went on. Can Youngkin win? Maybe. All the Virginia elections have been close for the last, I don't even know how many cycles. The presidential, the governor, everything is typically very close. It's typically not a dominant election. Will Trump swing it one way or another? Who knows? Because I don't, what happens if there's some sort of prosecution that goes against Trump? That's very likely to happen with all the things. Does all of his endorsements turn bad? Yeah, it could happen. Political stuff happens that way. But I wouldn't take it too seriously. I'd be more concerned about who the Democrats end up running against him. That'll say more about the likelihood of that being a win or not. I don't look at Virginia as a true bellwether state anymore.
I think what he is probably going to end up doing is distancing himself, right? I think what he's going to do is speak to those people. Like you said, Mike, he is a good Christian father. He loves the Lord, and that is what he's sticking to. We know, regardless of all of the things that we've seen over the last 4 years, that is not true for Trump. He will go wherever the wind blows him, just like his friends over in the House and in the Senate. I think what this candidate is going to do is he's going to stick to those bread and butter issues that everyday Republicans care about. Even though you're gonna have those that are more radicalized by Trump and in his base. I feel like in Virginia, you're going to have some of those people that are just going to hear him out just because of him being that father, that suburban father, that church-going father, who cares about the Second Amendment, who cares about your rights and your rights to bear arms. I think if he sticks to those talking points, whether he gets Trump support or not, doesn't matter, because, you know, he just has to keep his eye on getting the vote count that he needs to be able to win the election in Virginia.
Any other thoughts?
Just to answer your question more directly, I feel like, you know, in the future, we're going to see a lot of Republican candidates who are embraced by Trump be more neutral, so they won't exactly embrace his endorsement, but they also won't speak ill of Trump, you know, just to appease to both sides. And, you know, I feel like will be the safest option for these Republican candidates because of how split even the Republican Party is right now, at least for the next couple years.
If there are no other thoughts, I want to go ahead and thank this outstanding panel tonight. I so wish Professor Andrews could have been a part of the conversation, but of course, you know, we've seen, you know, technical problems happen, but I'm hoping to have him, you know, soon. This would be the last episode of the Political Mic for a long while, so I'm glad to have ended for this season, I guess, with the panel that I had tonight. Such a dynamic, such a engaging and thought-provoking group of folks. So thank you all so much. I look forward to you know, having you back on if you're willing. And I'm going to encourage those who view, you know, as I do every week, to stay engaged with reputable sources of information. Challenge your own sources of information. That's the only way in which we can really be engaged citizens and make intelligent decisions when we go into that voting booth, when we exercise our rights, when we decide what we stand for. There's so many outlets out there that would, you know, play on our passions, play on our emotions, and, you know, take us one way or the other. And we have to be cautious of that. You know, algorithms that calculate our moves on social media are just play into that. So I want to go ahead and encourage you folks to stay engaged. I look forward to hearing from you each soon. I look forward to keeping up with your moves in each of your respective fields and disciplines. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this episode. Episode 39. I can't believe it, of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening.